Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to put on our hard hats and become organizational architects. We're going to get into the blueprints and the inner workings that make businesses tick and figure out why some are built to thrive, while others are just, well, built to fail.
All right, so let's just dive right in by framing the core problem that pretty much every single leader faces. It's this true architect's dilemma, and it sits right at the heart of how any company operates, whether we're talking about a tiny startup or a massive global corporation.
You've probably felt this yourself, right? Some workplaces just feel electric. Ideas are flowing, things are getting done, and others, it feels like you're wading through mud just to send an email. The answer, almost always, comes down to two key ideas that people mix up all the time: organizational structure and organizational design.
Okay, let's break this down with a really simple metaphor. Think of the structure as the organization's skeleton. You know, the basic framework, the boxes and lines you'd see on an org chart. But a skeleton can't actually do anything on its own, can it? That's where design comes in. Design is all the living systems, the communication, the decision-making, the actual workflow that bring that skeleton to life.
So, as the architect here, your first huge decision is picking a fundamental blueprint for that skeleton. And look, there are a ton of variations out there, but most organizations are really built on one of three common types.
First up is the blueprint you've probably seen the most, the functional structure. It's pretty straightforward. You just group people by what they do. So you've got a finance department, a sales team, an engineering team, and so on.
This setup is absolutely perfect for developing deep, specialized expertise in something and keeping things stable. A great example is Greenpeace International. They organize by these core functions, which lets them build incredible skill in each area. The big risk, though, is creating what we call silos, where the marketing folks don't really talk to the engineering folks, and that can grind collaboration to a halt.
Okay, next up is the divisional structure. Now, instead of organizing by function, you split the entire company into separate, self-contained units. You can almost think of them as little mini-companies, all operating under one big corporate umbrella.
And this blueprint is just ideal for managing a whole bunch of different things at once. We see it with General Motors, right? They create a whole division for each car brand. Or you could do it by geography, like Greyhound does. The main trade-off here is you can get a lot of duplication. Each division might have its own HR team, for example, which can be way less efficient than having one central one.
And finally, we have the most dynamic of the three, the matrix structure. This model basically creates temporary, cross-functional teams to go after specific projects. So an engineer, a marketer, and a finance expert might all get pulled together just to work on one product launch.
Now, this kind of flexibility is absolutely crucial for companies like the defense contractor Raytheon. They have to assemble these unique teams of experts for every single complex, high-tech government contract they get. And when the project's done, the team just disbands. The famous challenge here, though, is that employees often end up reporting to two bosses, their functional manager and their project manager, which, you can imagine, demands amazing communication to avoid total confusion.
But look, just picking your blueprint, functional, divisional, or matrix, that's only the first step. Now it's time to open up your design toolkit to customize it and make sure all those parts can actually work together.
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? These design factors aren't isolated choices you can just make one by one. They're all pieces of a single puzzle. And if one piece doesn't fit, the entire picture can totally fall apart.
So, the first tool in your kit is all about power. Is your organization centralized, where all the major decisions happen at the very top? Or is it decentralized, where you actually push that decision-making power down to the people on the front lines who have the real expertise? Next up, you have to decide how the work actually gets done. Are you going to rely on standardization, with really strict rules and procedures for everything that ensures consistency? Or do you want to lean into mutual adjustment, where you trust your employees to use their own judgment and adapt to situations as they come up?
And finally, there's this really crucial balancing act. You've got to decide how much you're going to divide up the work into specialized parts. We call that differentiation. But here's the catch. The more you separate teams, creating all these departments and divisions, the more you have to intentionally bring them back together. And that's integration, using things like cross-functional meetings or dedicated project managers to make sure everyone is still pulling in the same direction.
So here's the most important point of all this. There is no single best design. There just isn't. The choices you make with your toolkit depend completely on the world that exists outside your company's walls.
This is the core idea of something called contingency theory. You know, for decades, managers were obsessed with finding the one perfect organizational model. But we now know you have to design your structure to fit the specific environment it operates in. What works for a fast food chain is going to be a total disaster for a software startup.
And this table illustrates the two extremes perfectly. On one side, you have mechanistic structures. They're rigid, they're formal, they're centralized, like a well-oiled machine. On the other side, you have organic structures, flexible, decentralized, and adaptive. But here's what's really important. This is not simply old versus new. Think about an airline or a nuclear power plant. In a super high-risk industry like that, you want a mechanistic structure with really strict rules. It's all about safety and reliability, no matter how fast the world changes outside.
But, you know, an architect's job is never really done, because the environment is always changing. The blueprints for organizations are constantly evolving right along with it.
Today, these pure models are pretty rare. What we're seeing are more complex hybrid structures that mix and match different elements. Companies are forming strategic alliances, sometimes even with their competitors, just to share resources. And of course, the rise of network and virtual organizations means a company might not even have a central office anymore, outsourcing core functions to partners all over the globe.
In fact, some of the more modern theories are suggesting we might be thinking about this whole thing wrong. Maybe structure isn't a fixed blueprint you decide on from the top down. Maybe it's something that's actually being created and recreated every single day through the routines, the habits, and the simple interactions of the people doing the work.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating final thought for this explainer. In a world of remote work, temporary teams, and fluid collaboration, what happens to the blueprint when the building itself is always changing? Are we moving toward a future of organizations that don't even have a skeleton? That's a question today's leaders are trying to answer right now.